Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the warm, fragrant world of ancient Egypt, where perfume first blossomed from the dry, sandy soil of the desert. Imagine walking through a bustling marketplace in the heart of Alexandria, the air heavy with a heady mixture of exotic flowers, rich resins, and the faintest hint of something divine. You might find yourself wondering how, on Earth, we went from simple oils and flowers to the vast global perfume industry we have today. Well, sit back, relax, and let's take a journey that begins thousands of years ago. It's a journey full of myths, magic, and maybe just a tiny bit of personal vanity. No judgment here. We all love a good scent. You probably won't survive this adventure without a proper appreciation for the earliest perfumes. Those ancient Egyptians were more than just an enigmatic civilization. They were, in many ways, the founding architects of our modern love for fragrance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. So leave a comment. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Perfume wasn't always the luxury we think of today. It didn't start with sleek bottles and posh boutiques. It began as a very practical, almost spiritual element of daily life in ancient Egypt. Picture it. The land of the pharaohs, the great pyramids standing tall, and the Nile winding its way through the heart of the civilization. Everything here was larger than life. From the architecture to the beliefs and the daily rituals. And the perfume, well, that was just as grand as everything else. The earliest forms of perfume in Egypt weren't so much perfume as we know it, but scented oils and resins that were often used in religious and ceremonial settings. This wasn't about masking odors, as we might think. This was about creating an experience, a connection with something beyond the physical. The Egyptians understood the power of scent, not just for beauty, but for its ability to summon the divine. Imagine offering a prayer to the gods with a sweet aroma of frankincense and myrrh filling the air. That's some serious spiritual ambiance. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians actually invented perfume or whether they simply perfected the art. What we do know is that the ancient Egyptians were pioneers in distilling and using essential oils long before anyone else. In fact, they may be the first civilization to create what we'd recognize today as modern perfume. They weren't just using flowers or oils for personal pleasure. They were using these scents in sacred rituals, to communicate with the gods, and even as offerings to the dead. Perfume was serious business in ancient Egypt. It wasn't just the pharaohs who enjoyed these scented luxuries. The wealthy elite, priests, and even soldiers had access to perfumes made from exotic flowers and resins, often imported from faraway lands. Frankincense, myrrh, and lotus blossoms. These were just a few of the ingredients that grace the bottles and jars of Egypt's most fragrant residents. And it's important to remember that, for the Egyptians, perfume wasn't just a material luxury. It was symbolic, a potent symbol of the divine, of purity, and of social status. Of course, creating a fragrance in ancient Egypt wasn't as simple as popping down to the corner store. The process was intricate and took time. First, you'd need to gather all the ingredients: fragrant flowers, herbs, resins, and oils, often transported from different corners of the known world. Then came the blending and distilling process, a mysterious art that only skilled perfumers knew how to perfect. Historians still debate how they managed this, considering the limited tools available at the time. Some believe that the Egyptians may have used an early form of distillation, though this is still a topic of much scholarly discussion. But the real beauty of ancient Egyptian perfume wasn't in its ingredients. It was in its purpose. It was a deeply personal experience. Perfume was part of a larger ritual. Priests and priestesses would anoint themselves with sacred oils before entering temples to make offerings to the gods. There's even evidence that perfume was used in embalming practices, with some of the most lavish scents reserved for royal mummies. For the Egyptians, scent was both a physical and spiritual tool, an invisible link to the divine and the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the first perfumes were entirely created for religious purposes or if they were a part of everyday life as well. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. What's clear is that perfume quickly became integrated into Egyptian culture, weaving itself into both sacred and secular activities. But where did the technology behind perfume making come from? Who were the masterminds behind these early fragrances? Let's move on to the next chapter of this story. The birth of the perfume industry in ancient Egypt. Now that we've established how perfume first bloomed in the religious rituals of ancient Egypt, let's take a closer look at the alchemy behind it. The Egyptians didn't just throw some flowers in a jar and call it a day. They developed a method that was both sophisticated and, to us, a little mysterious. The chemistry of perfume might sound like a modern-day science experiment. But believe it or not, ancient Egyptians were the pioneers of perfume chemistry. When we think of perfume today, we tend to imagine it in sleek, modern bottles, each with a complex combination of floral, woody, or spicy notes. But the ancient Egyptians didn't exactly have glass spray bottles or spray pumps. Instead, they used oils, resins, and unguents as their base for fragrance. Their process was a kind of hybrid of what we'd now call infusion and distillation, though historians still debate how they managed it with the tools available. Some argue that ancient Egyptians may have discovered the secrets of steam distillation, which later became the cornerstone of modern perfume making. You might be thinking, but how could they have possibly figured that out without modern technology? Well, it's a great question. Historians still argue whether Egyptians were the first to create true distillation, or if they simply used a simpler form of infusion, where fragrant oils were extracted by soaking flowers and herbs in oil. The answer isn't clear. But what we do know is that the Egyptians were extremely resourceful. They had access to a wide variety of plants, resins, and herbs, and they understood the natural world better than anyone. It's likely that over time, they perfected their methods for extracting the essence of these plants into oils that could then be used for their luxurious, divine scents. What's especially fascinating is that perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just about gathering pretty flowers and mixing them together. The Egyptians were keenly aware of the medicinal properties of plants. Many of the ingredients used in their perfumes also had healing properties. For instance, frankincense was not just an incense for the gods. It was believed to have antiseptic properties, useful for wounds and even in mummification processes. Myrrh was prized for its medicinal and anti-inflammatory properties, while lotus, often used in perfumes, was associated with tranquility and spiritual enlightenment. The Egyptians blended these natural elements into their perfumes not only for their fragrance, but for their other potential benefits. As for the oils and resins themselves, the Egyptians also had their own ways of extracting them. Essential oils were often pressed from flowers or herbs. The technique was somewhat similar to the modern method of cold pressing, where the flowers or fruits are crushed and the oils are separated from the pulp. Resin-based perfumes, on the other hand, were often created by heating resins to release their aromatic compounds. It was an intricate process, and getting the right balance of fragrances could take hours, if not days, of work. The Egyptians didn't just want a pleasant smell, they wanted something that would carry a specific mood or meaning. They understood the power of scent, how it could evoke an emotion or even alter one's state of mind. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians knew the exact science of what they were doing, or if it was simply based on tradition and trial and error. It's likely a combination of both. There's no denying, though, that the Egyptians were at the cutting edge of fragrance innovation, laying the foundation for what we know today as the art of perfumery. And this was no small thing. We're talking about a society that saw perfumes as sacred, and the making of them was an art form reserved for only the most skilled and revered artisans. One particularly important figure in early perfume making was the perfumery priest. These individuals were not just skilled in blending scents, but were often believed to have divine connections. Their role was to create scents that would appeal to the gods and ensure that the pharaohs received the proper offerings in the afterlife. The process of creating these divine perfumes was shrouded in mystery, and these priests were highly respected members of Egyptian society. In fact, perfume making became such a valued craft that it was often passed down through generations, with recipes carefully guarded and never shared with outsiders. Perfume making wasn't just limited to the temples either. As Egypt grew in wealth and complexity, perfume making became a thriving industry. It was no longer reserved for religious ceremonies. It began to spread into everyday life. Wealthy Egyptians, including nobles and merchants, began using perfumes to show off their status. And soon, the bustling streets of Egypt were filled with the smell of exotic fragrances. Ancient markets, like those in Alexandria, were often packed with small perfume shops where people could sample and buy these luxurious oils and unguents. The craft that began in temples soon spread to the bustling streets, and perfume making became a respected profession that could sustain entire families. Historians still debate whether the perfume trade started as a temple-based industry, or if it quickly evolved into a commercial one as Egypt grew in power. The truth is likely a mix of both. While perfumes were initially associated with religious rituals, the growing demand for luxury goods helped catapult it into an industry in its own right. With a growing middle class, as well as increasing trade with neighboring regions, the perfume industry saw an explosion of demand, and in turn, the first real perfume factories began to emerge. And here we are, millennia later, enjoying the fruits of their fragrant labor. Now that we've explored the early chemistry and rituals behind ancient Egyptian perfume, let's dive into something equally fascinating: the role perfume played in daily Egyptian life. It wasn't just an occasional luxury or a religious offering. It was a fundamental part of the culture, infused into almost every aspect of existence, from private beauty rituals to royal decrees. In ancient Egypt, scent was sacred, and the Egyptians believed it had a direct connection to the divine. But beyond the temples, perfume became a way of expressing social status, personal identity, and even spiritual devotion. The art of scent was intricately woven into the fabric of daily life, touching everything from the clothes you wore to the rituals you performed before dawn. Remember, we're still in the land of the pharaohs here, where life and death was governed by a set of rules that were larger than life itself. Your scent wasn't just something you wore. It was something that defined you. Let's start with the rituals. Picture this. The average Egyptian would wake up, much like we do today, perhaps stretching lazily as the sun's first rays filtered through their small homes. But instead of a cup of coffee, they would begin their day by anointing themselves with oils and perfumes. This wasn't just a personal preference. In ancient Egypt, cleanliness and fragrance were both seen as a way to ward off negative energies, purify the body, and protect the spirit. If you were wealthy enough to afford them, you would have had a whole array of oils and perfumes, each serving a distinct purpose: cooling, refreshing, or even healing. These perfumes weren't simply about smelling good. They were part of a larger spiritual hygiene, a way to align oneself with cosmic balance. Perfume, in this sense, was intertwined with their complex beliefs about the universe. The ancient Egyptians were keen on rituals, whether it was preparing for a religious ceremony or getting ready to meet a royal official. Cleanliness was often associated with purity, and scent was the unspoken way of signaling that purity. People used oils and perfumes not just to freshen up, but to mark an occasion, whether it was a moment of prayer or a social gathering. Perfume was about signaling intent. It marked an offering to the gods, a social exchange, or even a personal act of devotion. Historians still argue whether perfume in ancient Egypt was a necessary part of daily hygiene, or whether it was purely a luxury reserved for the rich and powerful. It's likely that it was a mix of both, with essential oils being used by nearly everyone, while exotic perfumes were confined to the upper echelons of society. The fact remains, however, that no matter your status, the smell of anointing oil or a carefully crafted scent was as much a part of life as the food you ate or the clothes you wore. Perfume permeated Egyptian life so thoroughly that even pharaohs were known to have a specific signature scent. It was said that Cleopatra, one of Egypt's most famous rulers, had her own distinct perfume that became as iconic as her beauty. The perfume industry didn't just cater to individuals. It also played a huge role in the Egyptian court. Perfumed oils were often used in offerings to the gods, with elaborate ceremonies dedicated to honoring divine beings. These ceremonies were some of the most sacred and important events in the Egyptian calendar. The pharaoh, often considered a living god, would lead these rituals while surrounded by priests who ensured that the proper scents were used to appeal to the gods. This wasn't just about pleasing the gods. It was about maintaining the favor of the divine, ensuring the prosperity of Egypt, and keeping balance in the universe. And speaking of Cleopatra, let's talk about how perfume was also used as a tool for political power. If you think fragrance is just a personal indulgence, think again. Ancient Egypt's royalty knew how to use scent to manipulate, influence, and maintain control. Cleopatra, with her legendary beauty and political savvy, understood that scent was a powerful weapon in her arsenal. One of the most famous stories surrounding Cleopatra and perfume involves her first meeting with Julius Caesar. Legend has it that she had herself smuggled into his presence, rolled up in a carpet, and once unrolled, she emerged surrounded by a cloud of intoxicating fragrance. This wasn't just a dramatic entrance. It was a strategic move. By making her scent memorable, Cleopatra ensured that Caesar wouldn't just remember her face, but also associate her with power, luxury, and divine presence. It's a fascinating example of how scent wasn't just about personal grooming. It was about making a lasting impression. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's famous scent strategies were entirely true, or if they've been embellished over the centuries. What we do know is that scent had a massive influence on both royal politics and everyday Egyptian life. While we often think of fragrance as a small, personal luxury, the Egyptians understood its much broader impact. It wasn't just about covering up body odor. It was about creating a sensory experience that connected the human and divine worlds, influenced social standing, and made lasting impressions on all who encountered it. Of course, not everyone in Egypt could afford to wear the same luxurious perfumes as the royalty. The divide between the rich and the poor was stark, and perfume was one of the many markers of wealth. While the wealthy could afford rare, exotic oils and perfumes from far-flung corners of the ancient world, commoners often made do with simpler scents: olive oils infused with local herbs and flowers. Still, even the poorest Egyptians likely had access to some form of fragrance, and it was common to see people applying oils to their skin as they went about their daily tasks. Perfume wasn't just about personal vanity, it was about identity. It wasn't just the pharaohs who wore it to express power. Everyone used scent to express something about who they were and where they fit into the grand tapestry of Egyptian society. Whether it was the scent of a priest before an offering, or the rich fragrance of a noblewoman preparing for a social gathering, scent was a language in itself, spoken through oils and perfumes. Now that we've seen how perfume was entwined with daily rituals, personal identity, and political power in ancient Egypt, let's explore how the pharaohs, with their wealth and influence, played a pivotal role in elevating fragrance from a simple luxury to a symbol of absolute power. For them, perfume wasn't just about personal grooming. It was a declaration of divine authority and social distinction. The pharaohs were the first to truly understand the magnetic power of scent. Imagine the opulence of a royal palace, with golden statues gleaming in the sunlight, vast courtyards shaded by palm trees, and the smell of fresh flowers and rare resins filling the air. To the ancient Egyptians, the pharaohs were more than just kings. They were gods in human form. And as with any divine being, they needed an aura of power that went beyond just their words and actions. Enter perfume. For pharaohs, the right scent was as important as wearing the finest linen or building grand monuments. Perfume was a symbol of purity, grace, and divine favor. It communicated to everyone around them that they were chosen by the gods, and, thus, not to be underestimated. The use of fragrance by the pharaohs wasn't just about indulgence. It was a strategic, political tool. For instance, the famous Egyptian queen Nefertiti, renowned for her beauty and influence, was said to have had a personal perfume formula that was passed down through history. This fragrance was not just for her personal enjoyment. It became a signature of her reign, a subtle yet powerful way to communicate her status. It's said that Nefertiti's perfumes were used in court rituals, ceremonies, and even given to ambassadors, ensuring that her fragrance lingered in the minds of those who came into contact with her. Imagine a powerful ruler whose every gesture, every word, every movement was accompanied by a carefully chosen scent. This is how the pharaohs crafted their divine image. Historians still argue whether the use of fragrance by the pharaohs was purely ceremonial or if it had deeper, more mystical significance. Some believe that the perfumes were a way for the pharaohs to present themselves as intermediaries between the gods and the people, using scent to strengthen their connection to the divine. There are even claims that the pharaohs had special perfumes made for specific occasions, including wars or royal decrees. These were powerful rituals designed to create an overwhelming aura of divine authority, ensuring that all who saw the pharaoh were in awe of their majestic presence. The idea of fragrance as a tool for political power didn't end with Nefertiti or the pharaohs. Perfume played a key role in royal diplomacy. Egypt, being a hub of ancient trade and culture, had frequent interactions with other nations, including Mesopotamia, Persia, and Greece. When these foreign dignitaries visited Egypt, they were often met not only with lavish gifts and warm welcomes, but also with signature Egyptian scents. The scent of Egypt, with its mix of frankincense, myrrh, and lotus, became part of the country's identity, a way for Egypt to stamp its authority on the world stage. Foreign rulers and ambassadors would leave Egypt not just with gold and jewelry, but with the lasting memory of Egypt's divine fragrance. This fragrant diplomacy wasn't just about perfume being worn. It also had to do with the very essence of Egypt itself. Scents were associated with the Nile, the land's sacred river, which was said to carry the divine scent of Egypt's wealth and fertility. The Nile was seen as a lifeblood that connected Egypt to the gods and to the rest of the world. The perfumes created in its shadow were no less powerful. Scent, in this sense, was about communicating Egypt's power, its richness, and its ability to transcend the mortal world and touch the divine. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians used scent as part of their diplomatic gifts purely for personal prestige, or if it also carried a deeper, symbolic meaning. Perhaps both. The idea of sending a foreign dignitary away with a carefully selected perfume was as much about making a statement about Egypt's grandeur as it was about offering a memorable sensory experience. After all, scent has a way of lingering in the mind long after other impressions have faded. Who wouldn't want to be remembered by their signature fragrance? Perfume also played a role in royal decrees and proclamations. Imagine a grand assembly at the royal court, with courtiers, priests, and dignitaries gathered to hear the latest royal edict. The pharaoh would enter the room, not only dressed in elaborate garments, but surrounded by an almost tangible cloud of fragrance. The scent wasn't just for personal pleasure. It was an aura of authority, a divine presence that marked the moment. The use of perfume as part of the royal ritual emphasized the pharaoh's unique status as not only a ruler, but a living god who was both human and divine, whose every word carried cosmic weight. But let's step back for a moment and think about the common people. While the pharaohs and the elite had their signature scents and access to the finest perfumes, the ordinary Egyptians also had their own forms of fragrance, albeit simpler. The working class used oils that were more affordable, though still deeply ingrained in the culture. The distinction was clear. There were perfumes reserved for the gods, for the pharaoh, and for the wealthy, while others used more practical scents. Yet, despite the divide, perfume was ubiquitous across all levels of society. Whether you were a noblewoman using exotic flower-based oils or a farmer using a simple olive oil infused with local herbs, scent was part of your identity, your daily life, and your connection to the divine. Historians still argue whether the use of perfume in ancient Egypt truly created a cultural divide, or whether the very essence of scent helped unify society. In any case, it's clear that the powerful symbolism of fragrance continued to play a massive role throughout Egyptian history. It wasn't just about smelling good. It was about being remembered, about wielding power, and about connecting to something much greater than yourself. Now that we've explored how perfume became synonymous with power, wealth, and divine favor, let's take a closer look at the men and women who were behind the scenes, crafting these magical, fragrant concoctions. The true masterminds of ancient Egyptian perfumery were often not the pharaohs themselves, but the skilled artisans who knew how to blend oils, resins, and flowers into something that could invoke the divine or capture the essence of the gods. These early perfumers were the true pioneers of the fragrance world, and their influence can still be felt today. Imagine stepping into an ancient Egyptian workshop, a dark, quiet space filled with the sweet, heady scent of oils and flowers. Here, skilled artisans labored over carefully guarded recipes, sometimes passed down through generations. The work was delicate, requiring knowledge not just of chemistry, but of the spiritual significance of each ingredient. You might think that perfume making was just a craft, but for these artisans, it was as much about understanding the divine as it was about understanding the flowers. Historians still argue whether perfumers were seen as religious figures themselves, akin to priests, due to their close association with the gods. What's fascinating is that while we often think of perfume making today as a glamorous, highly commercialized profession, in ancient Egypt, it was an intimate and sacred art. The first true perfumers likely worked within the temples, crafting scents for religious ceremonies and offerings to the gods. These scents were seen as essential to communication with the divine. A priest or priestess wouldn't dare enter a temple without first anointing themselves with the appropriate oils, each chosen for its ability to enhance their spiritual connection. In this way, perfumers were not merely artisans. They were part of the sacred hierarchy, creating perfumes that could alter the spiritual atmosphere and invoke the divine. The tools of the trade were surprisingly simple by today's standards, but still effective. Early Egyptian perfumers used alabaster vessels, stone grinders, and pestles to crush and extract oils from flowers and herbs. They would soak petals in oil, allowing the fragrant oils to infuse into the base, creating a delicate balance of natural fragrances. For resins like frankincense and myrrh, they would heat the substances to release their aromatic compounds, creating the rich, deep scents that were highly prized in Egyptian society. Although the processes might have seemed primitive, these early perfumers were masters of their craft, creating scents that were not only pleasing, but carried deeper meaning. Historians still argue over the exact methods that were used in ancient Egyptian perfumery. Some believe that the Egyptians used a process similar to modern distillation, while others think they relied more on simple infusions. Regardless, it's clear that the Egyptians were at the forefront of perfume-making techniques. They understood the properties of various plants and resins and how to extract their aromatic compounds with great skill. It's even believed that some of the earliest perfume recipes were preserved in ancient papyrus texts, written by the priests and perfumers themselves. These texts contain detailed instructions for creating everything from everyday perfumes to sacred oils used in temple rituals. Interestingly, there was a degree of secrecy surrounding these recipes. Only a few individuals had access to the most potent formulas, and they were highly protective of their craft. This may be why perfume recipes were passed down from master to apprentice, with each generation adding to the knowledge base while keeping the sacred formulas guarded. Some scholars argue that the secrecy of perfume making was part of the mystique surrounding the profession, creating an air of exclusivity that only added to the allure of these divine scents. But perfume making was not confined solely to the temples. As Egypt's power and wealth grew, so did the demand for perfume. By the time of the New Kingdom, perfume making had become an important industry, and factories dedicated to producing oils and fragrances began to appear. These factories, often located near major trading hubs like Alexandria, allowed the art of perfumery to spread beyond religious ceremonies and into the everyday lives of wealthy Egyptians. The perfume industry was booming, And with it came the rise of specialized perfume artisans who could now produce large quantities of fragrances for the elite. In these early perfume factories, workers would gather in large rooms, grinding flowers and mixing oils under the supervision of master perfumers. The factories became centers of commerce, where oils and perfumes were created, bottled, and sold to the highest bidder. The demand for exotic perfumes grew, and with it, the importation of rare ingredients from across the ancient world. Frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, lotus from the Nile, and flowers from distant lands. Egypt became the central hub for the finest perfumes in the ancient world. Historians still argue whether the emergence of perfume factories in Egypt was the start of modern industrial perfumery, or if it was merely an extension of the small-scale, artisanal craft that had existed for centuries. Regardless, it's clear that ancient Egypt played a pivotal role in the development of the perfume industry, paving the way for the global trade in fragrances that we see today. The rise of these perfume factories also meant the rise of specialized workers, artisans who were trained in the delicate art of creating fragrances. These workers were highly valued, as they were the ones who could take the raw materials and transform them into scents fit for the gods, the pharaohs, or the wealthy elite. Perfume making, once an art confined to the temples, was now a thriving industry with its own set of rules, trade practices, and specialized knowledge. These artisans were the unsung heroes of ancient Egyptian perfumery. While we often focus on the political power of the pharaohs and the beauty of the perfumes they wore, we must also remember the skilled men and women who spent their days crafting these divine elixirs. Without them, the scent of Egypt would not have reached the heights of luxury and spiritual significance that it did. As the ancient Egyptian perfume industry flourished, it didn't just remain contained within the walls of the royal court or sacred temples. Over time, the business of fragrance began to spill into the public sphere, growing in both complexity and reach. No longer a privilege for only the pharaohs and priests, perfumes became accessible to a wider swath of Egyptian society. From the bustling streets of Alexandria to the Nile's fertile banks, perfume became a symbol not just of luxury, but of an entire cultural shift, a shift that saw the power of scent transcend social classes. By the New Kingdom period, Egypt was not only a political powerhouse, but also an economic center where art, trade, and craftsmanship flourished. The demand for perfume grew, driven by both the rising wealth of the elite and the growing cultural importance of fragrance in social life. Trade routes expanded, bringing with them exotic ingredients from lands as far away as Mesopotamia, Arabia, and India. Frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and lotus. These were just a few of the precious goods that flowed into Egypt, enriching the local fragrance market. And it wasn't just about personal pleasure. Perfume became an expression of status. It was no longer reserved exclusively for religious ceremonies or royal decrees. People of all ranks, merchants, noblewomen, even soldiers began to wear and use perfumes to mark their identity. Historians still debate how much of a commercial boom the perfume industry experienced during this period. Some believe that by the time of the New Kingdom, perfume making had already become an established commercial industry. But others argue that the true boom came much later, with the rise of Alexandria as a trading hub. Still, it's clear that by the time the great city of Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great, perfume had become a commodity, a cultural marker that was not only a luxury, but a desirable good in the international trade market. But how did this shift happen? One of the key factors in perfume's transformation from a royal indulgence to a public luxury was the rise of the perfume workshops, which acted like the first perfume factories. These workshops, though small and often family-run, created a network of production that allowed fragrance to flow more freely into Egyptian society. This was a critical turning point, as more perfumes could be produced at a faster rate, allowing for greater distribution. While the perfume workshops continued to cater to the wealthy, they also started to create products that could be purchased by everyday Egyptians. Still, the most coveted perfumes, those made from rare, imported flowers or resins, were the domain of the elite. Perfume wasn't just a pleasant way to smell nice. It became tied to rituals of beauty, grooming, and daily preparation. The wealthy were known to use scented oils for a variety of purposes beyond fragrance. These oils served as moisturizers, protecting skin from the harsh desert sun and dust. They were also used to create a smooth, radiant complexion, and perfumes became synonymous with beauty. As a result, Egyptian beauty rituals became inextricably linked to fragrance. Women and men alike would bathe in scented waters, anoint their bodies with rich oils, and apply perfumes to their hair and clothing. This was also the time when perfume began to truly weave itself into the social fabric of Egypt. The wealthy might be the ones purchasing the most exquisite scents, but even the middle class used perfumes as part of their daily rituals. Perfumed oils were an essential part of the grooming kits of many Egyptians. These scents weren't just about smelling good. They were a way of communicating personal care, sophistication, and adherence to social norms. Just as clothing signified status, so too did the use of fragrance. You could tell a lot about someone by the scent they wore. Was it an oil made from local flowers, or was it a rare blend of imported spices, signifying great wealth and access? Historians still argue whether the perfume industry's expansion was driven by cultural factors, like the increasing importance of beauty and ritual, or whether it was simply a result of Egypt's economic prosperity and growing trade networks. Regardless of the exact causes, one thing is clear: perfume in Egypt became an essential part of life for people of all social standings. It was a tool of beauty, a symbol of social status, and perhaps most importantly, a connection to the divine. What's particularly fascinating is how the growth of the perfume industry in Egypt mirrored the rise of luxury culture as a whole. As Egypt's wealth increased, so too did the demand for rare, luxurious goods. Perfume, once associated only with the divine and the royal, became another way for individuals to showcase their social standing and personal wealth. Perfume-making workshops and markets in cities like Alexandria became increasingly sophisticated, with merchants offering a variety of scents, some bold and spicy, others delicate and floral, to meet the diverse tastes of Egyptian society. The accessibility of these perfumes was one of the defining characteristics of the period, allowing even the most modest citizens to indulge in the luxury of fragrance. But what about the exotic, rare perfumes? The ones that pharaohs, queens, and foreign diplomats coveted? Well, these scents were still a mark of elite status, and as trade routes expanded, Egypt's perfume industry became more reliant on imports. While locally grown flowers like lotus and jasmine were still used, the growing demand for spices and rare resins from distant lands meant that perfume ingredients became a crucial part of Egypt's international trade economy. The ancient Egyptians were some of the earliest traders in the perfume business, bringing in materials from places like India, Arabia, and even the African continent. Frankincense and myrrh, two of the most famous ingredients in ancient Egyptian perfume, were traded widely and became deeply embedded in Egyptian religious rituals and luxury culture. Historians still argue whether the growing perfume trade helped Egypt expand its global influence, or if it was merely a byproduct of the nation's burgeoning wealth. Either way, perfume became a crucial part of Egypt's global identity, a symbol of its power, luxury, and refinement. It was no longer just a local affair. It was part of the ancient world's broader exchange of goods and culture. So, while perfume began as something reserved for the gods and pharaohs, it didn't take long for it to permeate the entire Egyptian social structure. It became a part of the culture, the beauty rituals, the trade networks, and the very identity of Egypt. And as we'll see, its legacy would go on to influence other great civilizations, from Greece to Rome, and ultimately, the modern world of fragrance as we know it today. As we continue this fragrant journey, it's time to look at the fascinating tools and techniques the ancient Egyptians used to craft their luxurious perfumes. These artisans didn't have the modern-day machinery or advanced technologies that we associate with perfume production today. Instead, they relied on simple, but highly effective, methods to distill and extract oils from plants and resins. It's incredible to think that, without the modern glass bottles and airtight sprayers we take for granted, they were still able to create such complex and divine fragrances. Let's start with the basic tools. The ancient Egyptians, being master craftsmen, used tools that were simple in design but incredibly effective. One of the most important tools in their perfume-making arsenal was the stone grinder. These grinders, often made from hard, durable stones like basalt or limestone, were used to crush flowers, herbs, and resins into fine powders. This process was essential for extracting the oils from plant materials, which would then be mixed with other substances to create the final fragrance. Imagine the repetitive motion of grinding flowers, the scent of crushed petals filling the air, as the artisans carefully prepared their materials. For the extraction of oils, ancient Egyptian perfumers likely relied on two main methods: infusion and heating. In the case of infusions, flowers and herbs were steeped in oils, like olive oil or sesame oil, to extract their aromatic compounds. The oils would soak up the fragrance from the petals or leaves, creating a fragrant base that could then be used in perfumes. For resins, the Egyptians employed heat. Frankincense and myrrh, two of the most important resins in Egyptian perfumery, were heated to release their aromatic oils. This process required careful attention, as the resins could easily burn if exposed to too much heat. Still, with their intimate understanding of nature and chemistry, the Egyptians knew how to carefully control the process to produce the richest, most fragrant oils. Historians still debate how advanced the Egyptians' distillation methods were. Some scholars argue that they may have used a rudimentary form of distillation, a method that involves using heat to separate the volatile oils from plant materials. Others believe that the Egyptians relied more on infusions, as distillation may have been too complex for their time. Regardless of the method, what's clear is that the Egyptians were incredibly skilled in extracting the essence of flowers, herbs, and resins. The fact that some of their perfumes have survived in sealed jars and amphorae for thousands of years is a testament to their craftsmanship and ingenuity. One of the most fascinating aspects of ancient Egyptian perfume making was how they used these fragrances in a symbolic way. Each ingredient in a perfume was carefully chosen for its meaning, both practical and spiritual. For example, lotus flowers, which were associated with rebirth and spiritual purity, were often used in perfumes that were intended for religious ceremonies. myrrh, and frankincense. With their rich, earthy aromas, were used in perfumes for the gods, symbolizing divine power and protection. Even the act of anointing oneself with perfume was considered a ritual of purification. It wasn't just about smelling good, it was about becoming pure, spiritually and physically, before entering sacred spaces or interacting with others. Perfume making was also incredibly time-consuming. Crafting a single bottle of perfume could take days or even weeks, depending on the ingredients and the complexity of the fragrance. As a result, perfumes were considered highly valuable. The most luxurious perfumes were often reserved for the most important occasions: royal ceremonies, religious rituals, and state functions. Even the pharaohs didn't have a limitless supply of these divine fragrances. When Cleopatra is said to have bathed in perfume, she wasn't simply indulging in a personal luxury. She was making a powerful statement about her divine status and her connection to the gods. And while the creation of these perfumes was a highly labor-intensive process, the value of the final product was immense. A single bottle of perfume could be worth its weight in gold. But what about the everyday Egyptian? While the elite had access to the finest fragrances, the common people weren't left out. They, too, used perfume in their daily lives, albeit simpler versions. Ordinary Egyptians used scented oils to moisturize their skin, protect themselves from the sun, and give their bodies a pleasing fragrance. These perfumes were made from more readily available plants and herbs, such as olive oil, which was infused with local flowers and spices. For the common Egyptian, perfume was more of a practical necessity than a luxury. But for the wealthy, fragrance was a status symbol, an art form, and a way to connect with the divine. Historians still argue whether the use of perfume was a democratizing force or whether it created a greater divide between the elite and the common people. On one hand, it's clear that even ordinary Egyptians used perfume in their daily lives, making it a more widespread practice. On the other hand, the most luxurious and rare perfumes were still reserved for the pharaohs, the gods, and the highest echelons of society. This divide between the rich and the poor is something that can still be seen in the modern perfume industry today, where high-end fragrances often carry exorbitant price tags that place them out of reach for the average person. As the industry grew, so did the complexity of the perfumes themselves. New techniques were developed to blend different ingredients and create multi-layered, complex fragrances. This experimentation laid the groundwork for what would later become the foundation of modern perfumery. The ancient Egyptians, with their understanding of nature, their skillful use of materials, and their deep spiritual connection to scent, were the true pioneers of the art of perfume making. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians were the sole inventors of perfume making, or whether it was a practice that developed independently in other cultures as well. There's no doubt, however, that the Egyptians were the first to perfect the art, elevating perfume from a simple oil or resin to a complex art form that intertwined beauty, spirituality, and status. As we've seen, perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just a luxury. It was a powerful symbol tied to both the divine and the elite. Now, let's take a closer look at how these sacred, fragrant creations were used in Egypt's religious rituals. Scent played a pivotal role in ancient Egyptian spirituality, where fragrance wasn't merely an aesthetic pleasure, but a direct connection to the gods. The Egyptians believed that scents could evoke the presence of divine beings and purify spaces for spiritual practices. Picture a temple with towering stone columns and statues of gods and goddesses lining the walls. their eyes seeming to watch over you as you approach. The air inside the temple is heavy with the scent of burning incense, frankincense and myrrh that floats up toward the heavens, believed to carry prayers and offerings directly to the gods. For the ancient Egyptians, scent was integral to their religious ceremonies. Incense and perfumes were used not only to purify the worshippers, but to invite the presence of the divine. The smell of frankincense, in particular, was considered a spiritual link to the gods, and its smoke was thought to create a bridge between the mortal and divine realms. This idea of scent as a spiritual purifier is deeply rooted in Egyptian religious practices. The Egyptians didn't simply burn incense for its fragrance. They believed that the act of burning these sacred resins was a way to cleanse the space and the people within it. The scent of burning frankincense was associated with Ra, the sun god, and its smoke was seen as a vehicle for the god's power to enter the temple. Myrrh, with its deep, earthy aroma, was often used in funeral rites to prepare the deceased for the afterlife, ensuring that the soul would pass smoothly into the realm of the gods. These were not just scents, they were powerful, sacred elements in the spiritual and physical worlds. Historians still argue whether the role of perfume and incense in Egyptian rituals was always spiritual, or whether it also had a more practical aspect. Some scholars believe that the widespread use of incense in temples was also linked to the need to mask unpleasant odors, as ancient temples and burial sites would have been filled with the smell of decay and other less than pleasant fragrances. While this may have been a factor, the spiritual significance of these scents cannot be overlooked. The Egyptians had a deep understanding of the power of scent, and incense became a critical element in the purification process before entering sacred spaces. Perfumes were also used as offerings to the gods. Just as the Egyptians would bring fruits, bread, and animal sacrifices to temples, they would also present incense and oils as part of their ritualistic offerings. The idea was that the gods, who were thought to dwell in the temples, could enjoy these fragrant gifts, just as a human might enjoy a fine meal or drink. The act of offering perfume was seen as a gesture of respect and reverence. Just as a pharaoh would wear the finest perfumes to present himself before the gods, so too did common Egyptians offer perfume to win the favor of their deities. The significance of perfume in these religious practices went beyond mere offerings. It was thought that by burning incense or using certain perfumes, one could cleanse themselves of impurity and ensure their physical and spiritual well-being. Priests and high-ranking officials would bathe in fragrant oils and apply perfumes before entering the inner sanctum of temples, ensuring that they were clean both physically and spiritually. It was an act of purification, symbolizing a removal of worldly distractions and an alignment with divine forces. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians used perfume solely in religious ceremonies, or whether it also played a role in their personal, everyday rituals of worship. Some scholars believe that perfume was used exclusively in temples, while others argue that it was so integral to Egyptian culture that it must have played a part in everyday religious practices as well. Regardless, what is clear is that the ancient Egyptians understood the profound impact that scent could have on the human psyche. They believed that perfume was capable of transforming the mundane into the sacred, elevating the spirit and preparing the body for spiritual journeys, whether those were through rituals or the afterlife. Perfume in ancient Egyptian religion wasn't limited to temples and sacred spaces. The Egyptians also believed that scent played an important role in the journey to the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians had a complex and intricate understanding of the afterlife, with various rituals and offerings designed to ensure a safe passage to the realm of Osiris, the god of the underworld. Perfume and incense were often used in funeral rituals, where the deceased were anointed with fragrant oils to prepare them for the long journey to the afterlife. This use of perfume in funerary practices wasn't just about masking the scent of death. It was about ensuring that the deceased's soul was properly prepared for its journey, protected from harm, and welcomed into the afterlife with honor. Interestingly, perfume was also used in the embalming process. While the primary purpose of embalming was to preserve the body for the afterlife, the use of scented oils and resins was also part of this preservation. Myrrh, frankincense, and other aromatic resins were used to anoint the body, both for practical reasons, helping to preserve the body from decay, and for spiritual ones, ensuring that the soul of the deceased would be enveloped in divine protection. These embalming rituals, which included the use of fragrant oils, demonstrate how deeply connected scent was to every aspect of the Egyptians' religious worldview, from birth to death and beyond. Historians still argue whether the role of perfume in the embalming process was purely practical, or whether it was as much a symbolic gesture as a functional one. While the preservation of the body was a major concern, the spiritual significance of scent cannot be overlooked. Perfume and incense were not just about keeping death at bay. They were about honoring the dead and ensuring that they made the journey to the afterlife with the protection of the gods. Scent wasn't just a luxury or an indulgence in ancient Egypt. It was a medium for spiritual expression, a tool for purification, and a link to the divine. Whether in the context of a royal offering, a temple ritual, or a funeral procession, perfume played a role that went far beyond the physical world. It was an essential element of the ancient Egyptians' connection to the divine and to the mysteries of life and death. With all this talk about the sacred and ceremonial uses of perfume, let's take a moment to explore how scent became closely intertwined with beauty and personal grooming in ancient Egypt. While perfume had a profound spiritual significance, it was also a cornerstone of the Egyptian obsession with beauty, which was as complex and ritualistic as their religious practices. Imagine a bustling Egyptian household or palace, where daily beauty rituals were an essential part of maintaining both physical and spiritual well-being. Perfume, oils, and cosmetics weren't just a luxury. They were a part of everyday life for many Egyptians, regardless of their social class. Beauty in ancient Egypt was not just about appearance. It was about aligning oneself with divine harmony and cosmic balance. Both men and women in Egypt believed that maintaining an ideal appearance was essential to one's health, prosperity, and even the favor of the gods. Perfume, for example, wasn't just a way to smell good. It was part of the larger ritual of self-care that promoted spiritual cleanliness and well-being. Daily beauty routines often included anointing oneself with fragrant oils, applying cosmetics, and taking care to present oneself as a reflection of divine perfection. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians were the first to create the concept of beauty rituals as we understand them today, or whether they were part of an older, broader tradition of personal grooming that existed in other cultures. However, it's clear that Egypt, with its emphasis on order, cleanliness, and divine favor, raised beauty to an art form. The act of perfume application wasn't just about scent. It was about beauty as a holistic experience, one that involved care for the body, the skin, and the soul. Let's start with the first step in any ancient Egyptian beauty routine: bathing. Egyptians, both commoners and royalty, placed a great emphasis on cleanliness. They had elaborate systems for bathing, using a mix of water, scented oils, and even clay or minerals to cleanse the skin. Bathing was not just about hygiene, it was a way to prepare the body and mind for the day ahead. After bathing, Egyptians would often rub their bodies with oils infused with flowers, herbs, and other fragrant substances. These oils weren't just moisturizers, they were spiritual cleansers, intended to protect the wearer from evil spirits and the harsh environment of the desert. The most luxurious oils were often imported, with lotus, jasmine, and rose being favorites among the elite. Historians still argue whether the use of scented oils for skincare was driven primarily by a desire for beauty or by more spiritual, protective reasons. While many scholars believe that the primary motivation was spiritual, since these oils had sacred associations with purity, others argue that beauty, as we understand it today, played a significant role as well. In either case, the act of rubbing fragrant oils on the skin became a key component of Egyptian personal grooming, closely tied to both physical care and spiritual preparation. Once the skin was prepared, the next step was the application of makeup. Both men and women in Egypt wore cosmetics, although the style and types of makeup varied depending on the occasion and social status. For instance, the iconic dark eyeliner, made from kohl, a mineral-based powder, was used by almost everyone in ancient Egypt. It wasn't just used for aesthetic purposes, it also had protective qualities. The Egyptians believed that kohl helped protect the eyes from the harsh desert sun and the glare of the Nile. It also had symbolic importance, as it was believed to have magical properties, warding off the evil eye and ensuring good health and fortune. In addition to eyeliner, Egyptians used various oils and ointments to smooth the skin, and in some cases, create fragrances. Some of these oils were infused with flowers, while others were made from more exotic ingredients like cinnamon or ginger. Some of these fragrances were designed to evoke the presence of specific gods or to signal a connection to a certain divine power. It was common for Egyptians to wear specific scents depending on the occasion, their social status, or even their intended purpose. Royalty, for instance, might wear a more powerful, exotic fragrance that symbolized their divine right to rule, while everyday citizens might use simpler, locally sourced perfumes. Historians still debate whether the wide use of cosmetics and perfumes in Egypt was an extension of the cultural desire for beauty, or whether it was also tied to Egypt's broader societal need for protection and balance. Many scholars believe that beauty, magic, and protection were all intertwined in Egyptian cosmetics. A well-groomed person wasn't just physically attractive, they were also spiritually protected, which added to their overall sense of well-being and harmony with the world. While the most luxurious perfumes were still largely reserved for the wealthy and powerful, the widespread use of scented oils and cosmetics ensured that everyone had access to some form of fragrance, even commoners, who might not have had access to the rare resins and flowers imported from distant lands, could use simple oils and herbs to create fragrant concoctions that helped them fit into the social fabric of Egyptian life. Perfume was thus a part of every aspect of life: personal grooming, religious practice, and social interactions, emphasizing the idea that scent, beauty, and protection were all intertwined in the Egyptian worldview. The connection between beauty and perfume in ancient Egypt is a fascinating one. While it might seem frivolous to some, for the Egyptians, beauty was serious business. It was an essential part of spiritual life, social status, and personal health. The importance of fragrance in their beauty rituals reveals how deeply scent was woven into their culture, signifying everything from purity and protection to divine favor and status. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians' pursuit of beauty and fragrance was driven primarily by religious or cultural factors. Was it the gods' desire for cleanliness and purity that motivated the use of perfume? Or was it simply a matter of personal vanity and societal expectations? One thing is certain. Though, the ancient Egyptians understood the profound power of scent, and it became a key part of their daily lives, from the ritualistic to the personal. Now that we've explored how perfume became integral to daily life, religious practice, and personal beauty in ancient Egypt, let's take a moment to look at how the use of perfume played out in Egyptian society across different classes. It's easy to think of ancient Egypt as a unified society where the royal elites controlled everything. But the reality was much more complex. Perfume, as luxurious and revered as it was, had a distinct class divide, and the ways in which people of different social standing used scent reveal much about the broader cultural dynamics of Egypt. We've already seen how the pharaohs and elite classes had exclusive access to the most luxurious perfumes, crafted from rare resins, flowers, and spices. These perfumes were not just used for personal indulgence. They were tools of status, power, and divine connection. For the pharaohs, perfumes were a way to maintain an air of divine authority, as well as a means of showcasing their immense wealth. Cleopatra, for example, is often cited as someone who used perfume strategically, understanding the role scent played in her allure and political power. Her use of fragrance wasn't just for pleasure or grooming. It was a way to project an image of royal power that transcended her physical appearance. In fact, some historical accounts suggest that she may have even used her perfumes as a diplomatic tool, subtly communicating her status and influence to foreign dignitaries. Historians still debate how much Cleopatra's use of perfume was a calculated political maneuver or simply an expression of her royal luxury. Either way, the extravagant perfumes reserved for Egypt's elite, like frankincense, myrrh, and lotus, were seen as symbols of the gods' favor, and their use was a mark of distinction. These perfumes were not something you could simply buy off the street. They were produced by skilled artisans and were part of a larger, highly controlled perfume-making industry that catered to the pharaohs and their court. But what about the common people of Egypt? Did they have access to the same luxurious fragrances as the pharaohs and high priests? The answer is, unsurprisingly, no. While the elite may have enjoyed the finest perfumes, the average Egyptian, particularly those in rural areas, had to make do with simpler oils and fragrances. These were often derived from more common ingredients, like olive oil, which would be infused with locally grown flowers and herbs. While these perfumes weren't as exotic or luxurious as the ones worn by the elite, they still played an important role in the daily lives of Egyptians. Common Egyptians used perfume not for status or divine connection, but for practical purposes. The oils and fragrances were essential for skin care, helping to protect the body from the harsh desert climate, which was hot and dry. Bathing in scented oils was also a form of personal hygiene, as it helped to cleanse the skin and ward off the unpleasant smells that could accumulate from daily life. In this sense, perfume wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. Even the poorest Egyptians would have had access to some form of fragrance, whether it was a simple flower-based oil or a more basic resin. Historians still debate how much of a class divide existed in the use of perfume in ancient Egypt. Some believe that even common people had access to luxury scents, albeit in smaller quantities and more basic forms, while others argue that the perfume trade was heavily monopolized by the elite. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. while the upper classes had exclusive access to rare and exotic ingredients. Common Egyptians still made use of perfumes and oils in their everyday lives. What's clear, however, is that fragrance was something that transcended class lines, playing a role in both the sacred and the mundane aspects of Egyptian life. For the wealthy, perfume wasn't just about scent. It was also about projecting an image of refinement, power, and divinity. A noblewoman, for example, might apply the most luxurious perfumes before attending a banquet or participating in a religious ceremony. This wasn't just about smelling good, it was about maintaining one's status and social position. Fragrance became an extension of their identity, signaling their wealth and closeness to the gods. For the pharaohs and the priestly class, perfume was an essential part of their divine image. The pharaoh, as a living god, needed to appear immaculate at all times, and this included smelling divine. The perfume he wore was carefully selected, not just for its fragrance, but for its ability to convey his power and his connection to the divine realm. In contrast, common Egyptians would use simpler perfumes to fit into the social fabric of Egyptian life. These perfumes were often less complex, using local ingredients like jasmine, lavender, or even herbs like thyme or rosemary. While these fragrances were not as exotic or rare as those used by the elites, they were still valuable. The act of using perfume was tied to one's social role, whether you were a high-ranking official, a humble farmer, or a skilled artisan. And while it was the pharaohs who set the standard for what was considered luxurious, the use of perfume by the everyday Egyptian demonstrated the permeation of fragrance through all levels of society. Interestingly, perfume also played a role in Egypt's vast trade networks, which connected Egypt to regions far beyond the Nile. As Egypt grew in wealth and influence, so too did its perfume industry. The demand for high-quality perfumes, such as those made from frankincense, myrrh, and rare flowers, led to the importation of materials from distant lands. The perfume trade thus became part of Egypt's thriving commercial culture, and perfume became a global commodity. Egyptian traders would exchange these highly coveted perfumes for goods and resources from other ancient civilizations, including the Mediterranean and the Arabian Peninsula. These international trade routes helped spread Egyptian perfume-making techniques and their cultural significance across the ancient world. Historians still argue over how much the perfume trade contributed to Egypt's global influence. But it's clear that Egypt was a center for perfume production and trade. The use of perfume in Egypt was not just about luxury or beauty. It was part of a larger cultural and economic system that saw scent as a powerful tool of social status, spirituality, and even diplomacy. In sum, the use of perfume in ancient Egypt was a reflection of the complex social and religious structures that governed the civilization, from the royal court to the humblest of homes. Fragrance played an essential role in daily life. Whether it was for personal grooming, religious rituals, or social distinction. And as perfume became increasingly accessible, it allowed Egyptians from all walks of life to connect with the divine, elevate their social standing, and express their individuality through the power of scent. As we continue to follow the fragrant trail through ancient Egypt, we now arrive at a rather curious and essential chapter of perfume's history, its role in death and the afterlife. While perfume is often associated with beauty, luxury, and daily life, it also had a critical role in the preparation for the journey to the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with death, but more precisely, they were obsessed with ensuring a successful journey into the afterlife. a journey that would only be made possible by divine favor. And, unsurprisingly, perfume played a key role in this sacred transition. When we think of death in ancient Egypt, what often comes to mind is the grandiosity of the royal tombs, with their intricate wall paintings, gold treasures, and meticulously mummified bodies. But behind the scenes, perfume was an essential part of Egyptian funerary practices. The Egyptians believed that the body needed to be preserved not only for its own sake, but also to provide a vessel for the soul. And the act of preservation wasn't just about embalming with resins and oils. It also involved the use of perfumes to purify and prepare the deceased for the next phase of existence. Perfume wasn't just for the living, it was for the dead as well. The embalming process itself, which involved wrapping the body in linen and applying various oils and resins, was accompanied by the application of fragrant substances. One of the most important perfumes used in mummification was myrrh, a resin that was believed to protect the body from decay and preserve the soul's connection to the divine. It was also used as an offering to the gods, ensuring that the deceased would find favor in the afterlife. Frankincense, too, was used in the embalming process, filling the tombs with the sweet, smoky aroma that the Egyptians associated with the divine. Historians still debate whether the use of perfumes in mummification was purely practical, designed to preserve the body, or whether it had deeper spiritual significance. While it's clear that the resins and oils used in mummification had practical preservative qualities, the spiritual importance of these fragrances cannot be denied. The Egyptians believed that scent had the power to purify and protect the soul, and the fragrant oils used in mummification were a key part of this spiritual purification. Myrrh and frankincense were not just aromatics. They were sacred offerings that ensured a safe passage to the afterlife. But perfume's role in the afterlife didn't stop at the mummification process. Perfumed oils were also placed in tombs as part of the offerings to the dead. These oils were believed to appease the gods and make the deceased's journey to the afterlife more favorable. The tombs of Egypt's elite were often filled with fragrant oils, perfumes, and incense, which were meant to create a divine atmosphere for the dead. These scented offerings were as much a part of the deceased's ritual purification as the physical mummification itself. The idea was that the deceased would enjoy the fragrance of these offerings in the afterlife, just as they had in life, and that the scent would guide them toward divine protection. Historians still argue whether the role of perfume in funerary rituals was intended to comfort the living, the deceased, or both. Some believe that the use of scent in tombs was meant to create a pleasant atmosphere for mourners, ensuring that the final farewell was peaceful and sacred. Others argue that the fragrances were entirely for the deceased, to create a connection between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. Regardless of the intended recipient, one thing is clear. The use of perfume in ancient Egyptian death rituals was a powerful expression of the Egyptians' belief in the afterlife and the need to prepare both the body and the soul for the journey. Perfume also played a role in the offerings made by the living to ensure the protection of the deceased. These offerings were typically placed in tombs and temples as acts of devotion to honor the dead. Perfumes, along with food, drink, and other precious goods, were left as gifts to the deceased, so that they might be blessed and receive divine protection in the afterlife. In this way, perfume became a means of ensuring the continued favor of the gods, not just for the living, but for the deceased as well. The use of fragrance in funerary rituals was also tied to Egyptian mythology. The gods themselves were associated with certain scents, and the fragrances used in mummification were thought to call upon these deities for protection and guidance. For example, myrrh was sacred to the goddess Hathor, the goddess of love, fertility, and motherhood, and it was believed that her essence would be invoked during the use of this resin. Similarly, frankincense was associated with the sun god Ra, whose presence was thought to ensure a successful journey to the afterlife. In this way, perfume became a link to the divine, a way to summon the god's protection for both the living and the deceased. Historians still debate whether the fragrances used in mummification were purely symbolic or whether they had a more tangible effect on the preservation of the body. While the practical properties of myrrh and frankincense are well documented, there is still much speculation about the spiritual role these perfumes played. Some scholars argue that the scent itself had a purifying effect on the soul, ensuring that the deceased would enter the afterlife in a state of divine favor. Others suggest that the use of fragrance was more of a cultural tradition, an elaborate ritual designed to mark the transition from life to death and guide the soul toward its eternal rest. One of the most fascinating aspects of perfume's role in death and the afterlife is the fact that the Egyptians believed scent could bridge the gap between the mortal world and the divine. Just as perfumes were used to please the gods during life, they were also used to appease them in death, ensuring that the deceased would be protected and blessed in the afterlife. The importance of scent in these rituals shows just how deeply the ancient Egyptians believed in the power of fragrance, not just as a luxury, but as a vital spiritual tool. Perfume, in this context, wasn't just about beauty or luxury. It was about ensuring a smooth transition into the afterlife, maintaining a connection with the divine, and ensuring that the deceased received the protection and favor they needed for eternity. It was a final gift, a fragrant farewell, to guide the soul toward immortality. Now that we've explored the role of perfume in the ancient Egyptian afterlife, let's shift our focus to how perfume spread across borders and influenced other civilizations. Egypt wasn't just a hub of perfume production, it was also the starting point for the global perfume trade. As Egypt's wealth grew, so did its reach. Perfumes, once a privilege reserved for pharaohs and priests, began to travel far beyond Egypt's borders, influencing neighboring civilizations and shaping the broader world of ancient perfumery. The rise of Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great, was a key moment in this perfume revolution. Alexandria quickly became a major cultural and commercial center in the Mediterranean, a bustling hub where trade routes converged. Bringing goods from all corners of the ancient world, Egypt's influence over the Mediterranean basin grew exponentially, and with it, the export of Egyptian perfumes. The Greek and Roman worlds, which were deeply fascinated by Egyptian culture, embraced perfume not only for its divine and spiritual significance, but also as a marker of wealth and status. The perfume industry, which had been pioneered in Egypt, flourished in these new civilizations, and Egyptian perfumes became highly coveted. The Greeks, in particular, were captivated by the Egyptian tradition of fragrance, and they started adopting many Egyptian practices in their own perfumery. They were keen on using perfumes for both personal indulgence and religious purposes, just as the Egyptians had done for centuries. Greek philosopher and physician Hippocrates even spoke of the healing powers of fragrance, echoing Egypt's long-standing belief in the medicinal properties of essential oils. Greeks were also known to use perfume in their rituals to honor gods, much like the Egyptians. It was during this period that perfumes began to evolve from sacred offerings to luxury commodities, and the Egyptian method of blending oils, resins, and flowers laid the groundwork for modern perfumery. Historians still debate how much of ancient Greek perfume culture was inspired by Egyptian practices. Some scholars argue that the Greeks took the idea of perfumed oils and incense directly from Egypt, while others suggest that the Greeks may have developed their own methods independently, influenced by their access to different flora and trade routes. Regardless, the Greek adoption of Egyptian perfume-making techniques created a lasting legacy that would continue to shape the perfume industry for centuries. The Romans, who followed the Greeks in terms of cultural and technological development, also became deeply involved in the perfume trade. Roman luxury was deeply intertwined with the use of perfume, and the Romans took perfume making to new heights, developing sophisticated blending and distillation techniques. In fact, many Roman perfumers were highly trained specialists, and their perfumes were some of the most sought after in the Mediterranean world. The Roman elite often used perfume to mark their social status, just as the Egyptians had done before them. But it wasn't just the wealthy Romans who used perfume. The widespread use of scented oils, cosmetics, and incense became commonplace across Roman society. Even the soldiers used perfume to protect themselves from the sun and to mask the odors of their daily lives. Historians still argue whether the use of perfume in Roman society was a reflection of the growing class divide, or a cultural trend that transcended social status. While perfume was certainly a luxury, there's evidence to suggest that it became more democratized over time, available to people from various walks of life. Perfume was, in a sense, the universal marker of Roman opulence, with the elite using rare, imported fragrances and the middle class opting for more affordable versions made from local herbs and flowers. What's fascinating is that the perfume trade didn't stop at the borders of the Roman Empire. It spread further east, influencing other ancient civilizations such as Persia and India. The Persian Empire, with its vast network of trade routes, became a major player in the perfume trade, importing Egyptian, Greek, and Roman perfumes, and blending them with native aromatic substances. Perfumed oils became an integral part of Persian royal court life, with the elite using perfumes for both personal beauty and to create an aura of divine power. Similarly, in India, the art of perfume making flourished, and the use of fragrant oils for religious and personal purposes became ingrained in Indian culture. As the Persian and Indian empires interacted with Egypt and the Mediterranean world, the influence of Egyptian perfumery spread far and wide. Historians still debate whether the perfume trade in the ancient world was driven primarily by luxury or by the widespread religious and spiritual practices associated with fragrance. It's likely that both factors played a role. Perfume was, undoubtedly, a luxury commodity, especially among the elite. But it also held immense cultural and spiritual value, influencing not only personal beauty rituals, but also the rituals of the gods. The global spread of Egyptian perfumes was a testament to the powerful cultural, spiritual, and economic importance of scent. As Egypt's perfume legacy spread across civilizations, its influence on perfume-making techniques and cultural practices remained profound. The methods developed in ancient Egypt laid the foundation for the art of perfumery, which would evolve over centuries into the sophisticated perfume industry we know today. The use of essential oils, the blending of resins and flowers, and the belief in the divine power of fragrance all began in ancient Egypt and traveled far beyond its borders, leaving a lasting imprint on civilizations across the world. Perfume, once an exclusive art for the gods and pharaohs, had become a global phenomenon, from the royal courts of Egypt to the bustling streets of Rome. from the temples of Persia to the palaces of India. Perfume was now a symbol of luxury, spirituality, and status. And as we see today, the influence of those early Egyptian perfumers can still be felt in every bottle of fragrance, every luxurious scent that graces our skin. As the perfume trade continued to spread, it's important to look at how ancient Egypt's innovations in fragrance influenced modern perfumery. The art of creating perfumes that evoke emotions, symbolize wealth, and even elevate one's status has a clear line of ancestry that stretches back thousands of years. Directly to the Egyptians, the foundations they laid, based on the meticulous blending of oils, resins, and flowers, are the same principles that guide the modern perfume industry. One of the key elements that Egyptian perfumers introduced was the use of essential oils. Though the Egyptians didn't have the technology we have today, their methods of extracting oils from flowers and plants, often through infusion or heating, created the groundwork for what would eventually evolve into the essential oil industry. They understood the therapeutic, spiritual, and emotional power that certain scents could impart. For instance, frankincense and myrrh weren't just used for their aromatic properties. They were believed to have spiritual and healing qualities. Frankincense was often used to purify spaces, while myrrh was associated with protection and healing. These sacred resins were used not only in religious rituals, but also in daily life as part of beauty and self-care routines. The Egyptians didn't just use fragrances for spiritual and ritualistic purposes. They also appreciated the transformative power of scent in a more personal sense. Their perfumes could make someone feel divine, powerful, or calm, depending on the ingredients. These early perfumers understood that fragrance could change a person's mood, and they used this knowledge to create perfumes that transcended their initial use. The Egyptian emphasis on mood-enhancing scents laid the foundation for one of the most essential aspects of modern perfumery: creating perfumes to evoke specific emotions or states of mind. Historians still debate the exact techniques used by ancient Egyptians to extract essential oils. Some scholars believe that the Egyptians used early distillation methods, while others argue they relied on simple infusions. However, what is clear is that the Egyptians had a deep understanding of how different scents could affect the body, mind, and spirit. They may not have had the precise distillation technology of today, but they intuitively grasped how to extract the essence of plants and resins for use in their perfumes. Today, we use steam distillation to extract essential oils from flowers, leaves, and wood, a method that evolved much later. But the groundwork for this was undoubtedly set in ancient Egypt. Another contribution Egypt made to modern perfumery was the importance placed on perfume making as an art form. The ancient Egyptians did not just create fragrances to mask unpleasant smells. They saw perfume making as a sacred craft that was deeply intertwined with their religious and cultural beliefs. The priests and perfumers who created these divine scents were regarded as skilled artisans, and their work was highly valued. This reverence for the craft has persisted through the centuries and remains a core principle in the modern perfume industry. Today, perfumers are highly trained professionals who approach fragrance creation with artistry, precision, and knowledge of both chemistry and emotion. Modern perfumers, like their Egyptian counterparts, craft scents that tell a story, evoke feelings, and even express personality. The concept of using fragrance as an art form remains central to the perfume industry, and this is something the ancient Egyptians understood well. Perfume making in ancient Egypt was also one of the first industries to see a blending of artistry and commerce. The perfume trade, which began as a sacred religious practice, soon became a thriving industry, with workshops and factories creating perfumes for both the elite and the general public. The growing demand for perfume in Egypt, fueled by its social, cultural, and religious importance, paved the way for the global perfume industry that exists today. And much like ancient Egypt, perfume has remained a symbol of luxury and status. Even in modern times, high-end fragrances are often marketed as exclusive, rare, and tied to personal identity, values that were firmly established by the Egyptians. Historians still debate the origins of the commercial perfume industry. Some believe that the perfume trade began in ancient Egypt and spread outward to other civilizations, while others argue that it was the Greeks and Romans who truly commercialized the art of perfumery. However, it is clear that Egypt's innovations in fragrance, its ability to blend nature's oils into captivating scents, and its cultural reverence for perfume set the stage for the global perfume trade. Another aspect of modern perfumery that traces its roots back to Egypt is the use of perfume as a symbol of social status. In ancient Egypt, perfume was a luxury item that could only be afforded by the pharaohs, priests, and elite members of society. Perfume wasn't just a way to smell good. It was a way to communicate wealth, power, and divine favor. This symbolism has carried over into the modern perfume industry, where high-end brands and rare ingredients are marketed as luxury items, designed to elevate the wearer's status. From expensive perfume bottles to exclusive blends made from rare flowers and resins. Perfume today is still used as a status symbol, much like it was in ancient Egypt. Perfume's continued association with luxury and status also means that it remains deeply tied to fashion and self-expression. Just as the Egyptians carefully selected their fragrances to reflect their personal identity and connection to the gods, modern perfume wearers often choose scents that speak to who they are. Whether it's a fresh floral fragrance or a deep, sensual musk, perfume is a way for people today to express their personality, mood, and even aspirations. In this way, modern perfumery is still a tool for personal transformation, much like it was for the ancient Egyptians. Historians still argue whether perfume's evolution into a commercial product was inevitable, given the demands of the elite, or whether it was simply a result of broader societal changes and trade networks. Regardless, what's clear is that Egypt's perfume-making practices, grounded in spirituality, luxury, and artistry, set the foundation for the perfume industry we know today. Egypt's influence on modern perfumery is immense and enduring. The ancient Egyptians didn't just create perfume, they created an entire cultural context for scent. They established perfume as something more than just a cosmetic. It was a symbol of purity, a link to the divine, a luxury, and an art form. Today, we continue to celebrate perfume for these same reasons, whether used in a personal beauty routine, as a gift, or as a way to make a statement. The ancient Egyptian legacy lives on in every fragrant bottle that graces modern counters. As we approach the final chapter of this fragrant journey, it's important to step back and appreciate the legacy that ancient Egyptian perfume making left behind. Despite the millennia that have passed since the time of the pharaohs, the influence of their scent innovations is still felt across the world. Today, perfume is not only an art, but also an essential part of daily life, culture, and luxury. The foundation that was laid in ancient Egypt shaped not only the way we view scent, but how we incorporate it into our lives, in ways that are both personal and symbolic. In modern times, the perfume industry is one of the most lucrative markets in the world. However, despite its commercial success, the essence of what makes perfume so special remains rooted in the rituals and practices established in Egypt thousands of years ago. Just like the ancient Egyptians, people today continue to associate perfume with luxury, beauty, and even spirituality. Scents are chosen for their ability to enhance mood, express individuality, and symbolize social status. This, of course, traces its origins back to ancient Egypt, where perfume was not just for the elite, but was seen as a vital part of life and death, integrated into rituals, religious ceremonies, and even daily routines. One of the most significant ways the legacy of Egyptian perfume endures today is in the way scent is used to symbolize wealth and status. The world of high-end perfumes today mirrors the extravagant practices of the pharaohs, who were known to wear only the most exclusive, rare, and luxurious fragrances. It's almost impossible to walk into a luxury perfume store today without seeing a connection to ancient Egyptian luxury. From expensive perfume bottles to rare ingredients sourced from distant parts of the world. Today's perfume industry continues to market fragrance as an indicator of wealth and exclusivity. And just like in Egypt, the perfume is not just about smell, it's a statement about the wearer's social position and the status they wish to project. This concept of fragrance as a symbol of wealth and status continues in the form of niche perfumery, a rapidly growing sector of the perfume market that offers rare and unique fragrances. These perfumes are often crafted with high-quality, expensive ingredients and marketed as art, rather than just a product to be worn, much like the Egyptian elite's preference for rare resins, flowers, and oils. Today's perfume connoisseurs seek out bespoke, one-of-a-kind scents that make a statement about their exclusivity. This focus on artistry and rarity connects directly to the Egyptian reverence for the perfume-making craft, which was an art passed down through generations. The spiritual role of perfume, too, has left a lasting impact. In modern perfumery, certain fragrances are still used for their supposed healing or mood-altering properties. The use of essential oils for aromatherapy, which gained popularity in the 20th century, is just one example of how modern fragrance practices echo those of ancient Egypt. Egyptians understood that certain scents, like frankincense and myrrh, had calming or protective qualities. And today, essential oils are used in much the same way. Modern wellness cultures, such as yoga and meditation practices, often incorporate incense and aromatic oils to create a sacred, soothing atmosphere. These uses are a direct nod to the spiritual significance of scent in ancient Egyptian life, where fragrance was used to purify the body and soul and connect with the divine. Perhaps one of the most striking parallels between ancient Egyptian perfumery and modern fragrance culture is the continued global trade of perfume ingredients. Just as Egypt's perfume industry relied on international trade routes to bring in exotic materials like frankincense, myrrh, and lotus, today's perfume market continues to thrive on the importation of rare flowers, spices, and resins from all over the world. The global perfume trade is worth billions of dollars. And like the ancient Egyptians, modern perfumers often combine ingredients from multiple continents to create something unique and exotic. The legacy of the Egyptian perfume trade has shaped the global nature of the modern perfume industry, where scents are not confined to any one region, but instead represent a fusion of cultures, traditions, and stories. As we look ahead to the future of perfume, we also see the growing interest in sustainability and natural ingredients. In ancient Egypt, perfumes were made from plants, flowers, and resins that were sourced from the land, while modern perfumery has incorporated synthetic compounds. There's a growing movement to return to natural ingredients that are sourced ethically and sustainably. much like the Egyptians who were in tune with the natural world and used the resources around them. Today's perfumers are looking to reconnect with nature and ensure that the ingredients they use are responsibly harvested. This focus on sustainability represents a return to the ancient Egyptian ideals of balance with nature, a concept that was woven into every aspect of Egyptian life, from perfume making to religious rituals. Historians still argue about the role of ancient Egypt in the creation of modern perfume, while Egypt undoubtedly laid the foundation for many of the practices and principles that guide the industry today. There were other cultures, such as the Greeks and Romans, that also contributed to the evolution of perfume making. However, what is clear is that Egypt's influence remains undeniable. It was in Egypt that perfume first gained its divine significance, was turned into an art form, and was developed into an industry that spanned both sacred and secular realms. The ancient Egyptians, with their reverence for the power of scent, created the blueprint for what would become the global perfume industry. So, as you open your next bottle of fragrance, remember that you're not just smelling a pleasant scent. You're inhaling the legacy of a civilization that used perfume to connect with the divine, express power and beauty, and influence the world around them. From the pharaoh's lavish ceremonies to the commoner's daily beauty routines, from embalming rituals to divine offerings, the ancient Egyptians understood the profound impact that scent could have. And as we continue to wear, use, and appreciate perfume in all its forms today, we are still following the ancient Egyptians' lead, adding our own layer to the rich and aromatic history that began thousands of years ago on the banks of the Nile. As we come to the final stop on this aromatic journey through time, let's slow down and reflect on how the ancient Egyptian perfume legacy has shaped not just our modern perfume culture, but our understanding of luxury, ritual, and even personal identity. Perfume. Once a sacred commodity used by pharaohs to communicate with the divine, has evolved over millennia, influencing cultures, economies, and even the way we define beauty today. The ancient Egyptians may have long passed from the earthly realm, but their devotion to scent, their belief in its power to transcend the physical world, and their understanding of fragrance as a transformative force continue to resonate with us. Perfume in Egypt wasn't just about luxury. It was an expression of devotion, status, and spirituality for the pharaohs. Perfume wasn't simply about smelling good. It was an outward manifestation of their connection to the gods, a divine aura that set them apart from mere mortals. And for common Egyptians, it was about balance, health, and the pursuit of spiritual purity. Scent was an invisible thread that wove through every aspect of life in Egypt, from birth to death, from royalty to the everyday person. Modern perfumery may have advanced with the advent of synthetic materials and high-tech extraction methods, but it still hinges on the same fundamental principles that the ancient Egyptians laid out centuries ago. The understanding that fragrance can influence mood, connect us to our past, and even elevate our sense of self is as relevant today as it was in the land of the pharaohs. Just as the Egyptians mixed resins and oils to create perfumes that would invoke the gods, modern perfumers blend ingredients that evoke specific emotions, whether it's confidence, calm, or seduction. And just as Egyptian perfumes were linked to the divine, today's fragrances often carry with them a sense of personal mythology, a narrative that speaks to our own identities and aspirations. Of course, the global perfume industry today is far more commercial than it was in ancient Egypt, with an almost overwhelming array of brands and scents. But the modern perfume market is still built on the same principles that the ancient Egyptians established. The art of blending rare and valuable materials, the importance of fragrance in defining social status, and the desire to capture the divine essence of nature in a bottle. When you pick up a modern perfume, you're not just choosing a scent. You're participating in a legacy that stretches back thousands of years. One of the most striking legacies of ancient Egyptian perfume is the role it plays in shaping how we present ourselves to the world. Just like the pharaohs used perfume to define their divine right to rule, we use fragrance today to define our own personal identities. Whether we wear a light floral scent in the morning, a bold woody fragrance in the evening, or something entirely unique. Perfume is a powerful tool for self-expression. It's no wonder that many people feel deeply connected to their favorite fragrances, as though they are an extension of themselves. The power of scent to communicate our personality, desires, and even emotions is an enduring connection to the ancient Egyptian belief that fragrance is not just for pleasure, but a deep reflection of our being. Perfume's role in our lives today may not be as intertwined with the sacred or the royal, but it continues to influence our emotions and perceptions. Think about how the simple act of wearing a favorite perfume can transport you to a special moment in time, a wedding, a vacation, or even a particular season. These fragrances become markers of memory, just as the perfumes of ancient Egypt were used to honor the gods, mark life transitions, or commemorate a significant event. Just as the Egyptians revered scent for its connection to the divine, we still understand perfume as something beyond mere fragrance. It's a sensory reminder of moments, identities, and emotions. Now, as we wind down, let's take a moment to reflect on the immense impact ancient Egyptian perfume making had on the world we know today. Perfume's journey began with the Egyptians, who pioneered methods of fragrance creation and linked perfume to their spiritual practices. Over the centuries, perfume spread across civilizations, from Greece and Rome to Persia and India, each culture adding its own layers to the art of scent making. And today, we stand on the shoulders of those ancient perfumers, enjoying a flourishing industry built on the same principles of artistry, luxury, and connection that the Egyptians first established. So, as we ease into the end of our journey tonight, it's remarkable to think that the bottles we use today, whether they're simple or opulent, classic or modern, are the direct descendants of the oils and fragrances that filled the temples, palaces, and tombs of ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians understood what many of us still do today. Scent has the power to evoke, to heal, to remember, and to transport us. It is a timeless, invisible link between the past and the present, between the mundane and the divine. And as you close your eyes tonight, think of the ancient Egyptians, carefully mixing oils and resins, connecting with the gods, and preparing for the afterlife with their beloved perfumes. Their legacy still lingers in the air, in the quiet moments when we catch the scent of something familiar and feel the weight of history in the invisible air around us. It seems like we've reached the end of the script, so I will wrap things up here. If you'd like any revisions, edits, or have another request, feel free to let me know. End of script. Sweet dreams.